Hi everybody, welcome to the third episode of the Sports Psych Sesh, bringing you the latest academic research and news about sports psychology in an easy and digestible way. I'm joined again by my partner in crime, Owen McNeil. And Owen, would you like to introduce our guest?
Yeah, I'm delighted to introduce Hannah McCormack. Hannah, do you want to introduce yourself there to the listeners?
Okay, so you already know my name. My name is Hannah, just to repeat myself. I am a third-year Ph.D. student here in the University of Limerick.
What are your research interests?
My research interests, so basically the kind of umbrella term that shadows my research is the idea of positive psychology. So positive psychology is kind of the movement of making sure that people live their best lives, kind of are the best versions of themselves rather than just kind of coasting through at the okay level.
Cool. So how did you get involved in sports psychology in general?
It probably started a really long time ago. So in Ireland, when you are finishing off your secondary school education, you have to decide what you want to do in college. And long before you sit your final exams, you have to start the application process for college. And at the time, I was looking into psychology in general because I was really interested in what made people tick, what motivated people with their everyday actions and things like that. And I also realized that I love sport. I'd done kind of all different sports growing up, but always been really active. And actually the idea of sitting in a lecture hall or a classroom for the next 4 years not having any kind of physical component to my education made me really sad. So I thought I'd combine the two, and I went in to university to study sports science with the idea to specialize in sports psychology.
Cool. So you're here to talk with us about your new paper. Can you tell us a little more about it?
So yeah, I have a paper coming out very soon. It's already been accepted by Frontiers. It's called Practicing What We Preach, Investigating the Role of Social Support in Sports Psychologists' Well-Being. So this paper kind of comes from the first study that I did for my PhD, in where I interviewed a whole load of sports psychologists from different parts of the world. So I got Americans, people from the UK, I got people from Australia and New Zealand, and I got people from Ireland. And I basically asked them lots of questions surrounding different aspects of well-being that was associated with work. And one of the areas that I focused in on was the idea or the role of social support and how that kind of protects or enhances a sports psychologist's well-being. So that's kind of the very general overview of it.
So I was reading your paper, and I thought it was really interesting, the whole social support component, how sports psychologists can somehow have a pretty loosely defined role in the organization. Can you talk a little more about that?
So, yeah, sports psychologists within organizations, the role's not really always clearly defined because I guess compared to other sports service provision, sports psychology is quite young. So a lot of people don't necessarily know what a sports psychologist can do. They believe that sports psychologists are there to kind of be motivators or to kind of deal with certain issues, when really and truly a sports psychologist can be more than just an issue dealer, fixer person.
I think it's a challenge that, if you look at a nutritionist role, for example, in a sporting organisation, there's very tangible evidence of what they're trying to achieve. So they'll take an athlete, they'll do a DEXA scan on an athlete, they'll get their skin folds, they'll do a nutrition program over the course of how many weeks, and then they'll measure that again at the end of that program. There's very tangible evidence about that working. Whereas with a sports psychologist's role, what we're doing is slightly less tangible, it's slightly less measurable outside of some sort of experimental design. Is that an issue that, as to why maybe that the role of a sports psychologist is a little bit more loosely defined than other roles in a sporting organisation?
Yeah, I think it's just kind of like the unawareness and, like you said, the kind of untangibleness of what a sports psychologist can do, and the areas that we can kind of work with. Like, I remember an interview from years ago where a sports psychologist said that they know that their work is done when, like, 5 years down the line, an athlete refers to the work that they did 5 years previous. So it's not something that happens or can change overnight or anyone can actually see necessarily from the outside. It's more of kind of that feeling that an athlete gets themselves. So yeah, it can be viewed that way. I think sometimes as well, like, sports psychologists can have, there's like kind of a little bit of mystery about them because our roles are so personal to the athlete, and what we talk about with the athlete or with a coach or with anything like that can be so personal we can't necessarily share it. So therefore people don't know what we're working on or why we're working on certain things, or there might be stuff that we're not allowed to share with people. So again, that can be, you know, where coaches don't know or managers don't know what we're actually doing. There is also that, like, little bit of stigma still left over of you, if you work with any kind of psychologist, whether it's clinical, sport, whatever, that you have some sort of, like, issue with, like, quote unquote issue that's, you know, people are afraid of it. So that's obviously getting better, but there's still some left over. The other thing about, like, not having a really clear definition of what you do is that sometimes athletes need to talk to a sports psychologist at really inconvenient moments for everyone else. So you might get a phone call at 9 p.m. at night saying, from a coach or from the athlete saying, I really need to talk to you about this. Or it can happen in the middle of a training session and the coach might perceive that the sports psychologist is detracting or taking away from the actual training session. Or a sports psychologist might insist on holding a team meeting during training times. Not insist, but suggest. And a coach will feel kind of threatened or feel that, like, it's actually taking away from the physical preparation of an athlete. So I think between kind of inconvenient moments when a sports psychologist might be called upon, and also kind of the opportune moments might not be opportune for everyone else. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and in line with that, if you have all these informal meetings and getting calls late at night and early in the morning, that's a lot of time to be working, and that's a lot of stress to constantly be on point. Is that something you found with sports psychologists?
Yeah, I mean, there's, like, research has been done before, and there's kind of quite a few papers out there and kind of anecdotal evidence that shows that, especially during crunch time, so during major competition, especially the Olympics, sports psychologists can be called upon, like, at any time. They might not be able to switch off because an athlete might want to talk to them in the evening, or they might want to talk to them first thing in the morning. So our supervisor, Tig, actually did some research, or a little bit of research, in the lead up to the 2012 games. And he found at the previous games, a sports psychologist he spoke to worked almost 24 hours around the clock. And during that during that time period, you're always expected to have the answers or to be able to provide the solution. You're often seen as well as a first aider, so someone might come to you with an issue that you haven't even experienced before because you may not have spoken to that athlete, and then all of a sudden you're required to fix it or to come up with some sort of solution. So it can be really hard to, like I said, be on point the whole time.
Right, and I would imagine as much stigma there is with an athlete seeing a sports psychologist, there would be additional stigma if a sports psychologist saw any kind of psychological consultant or anything like that.
Yeah, again, research out there kind of has shown that psychologists, again, from any specialization, can be reluctant to actually talk to other people about their own psychological needs.
It's almost a do what I say and not as I do kind of a situation, isn't it?
And the research actually shows it's not necessarily a stigma, because obviously we have an awareness of how beneficial it is, but it might actually be because we don't believe that anyone else has the correct tools to deal with the problem, or it might be a little case of, I can deal with this because I actually know. So if I have the tools to deal with this, why should I need to turn to someone else? I should be able to fix myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
There's almost like a little bit of pride behind it of, if I'm telling one person to do it, and then they find out that I'm actually going to see someone else to tell me how to do it, then where, like, it's almost like some people are afraid that if they're vulnerable, it will detract from their own kind of status as a psychologist. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it seems a little limiting. It seems a little misguided.
Yeah. And the other thing is that as human beings, we are actually really, really poor at taking our own advice. So again, there was a really cool article, I can't remember the name of it now. It was just, and it wasn't even kind of scientific, but it was that if you actually listen to your own advice, or sorry, if someone seeks your advice, you should listen to it, because that's actually what you should do, or that's what you believe you should do. And there was this awesome example of an actual study was done where people were asked if a loved one or a really close friend of theirs was given a very significant medical diagnosis from a doctor, would you recommend that that person seeks a second medical opinion? And the majority of people said yes, you should definitely go and get a second opinion. And then they literally flipped the question around and said, if you received a poor diagnosis or a bad you were diagnosed with some serious medical condition, would you personally ask to seek a second medical opinion? And the majority of people then said no. And the reason being was I don't want to make my doctor or physician feel like I don't trust them, or that I don't believe them, or I'll be blah 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 blah. When it's but you literally would tell your friend to seek a second medical opinion, but yet you won't do it for yourself. It's kind of funny,
right? It's
an interesting insight into the human psyche, I think, in terms of how we take advice and how we give advice. Yeah. I'm interested to know, Hannah, why there was a qualitative approach taken in the study. I appreciate that. Was it a case that you were just looking for as much kind of detailed information from each of the participants as possible, and that's limited if you would take the quantitative approach, or what was the thinking behind the methodology used in the study?
Yeah, definitely, if you hand someone a questionnaire and you ask them to tick a box, they can only tick the boxes that are available.
Yeah.
However, if you take the qualitative approach and you actually interview people, you kind of get more of a richer level of information from them. To kind of get a little bit sciencey right now, the technique that I use is something called critical incident technique. So what I did for my interviews was I defined a term, and then I asked the participant to think specifically of a time in their life when they felt that term would apply to them. So I defined work engagement, I defined burnout, and then I would ask them, can you think of a time when you fitted into that definition? So it kind of gives the researcher a wider range of information to pick out the relevant pieces of information.
It's a much deeper range of information as well, isn't it? Yeah.
And also, excuse me, and also, at the end of the day, psychologists should hopefully be quite reflective. They should also be quite good at talking, which is probably quite evident from this podcast. And so therefore we thought or felt that, taking this approach would be kind of more beneficial to what we were looking for.
So what sort of things did the sports psychologists in the Olympics struggle with?
I think kind of one of the things that we found is that sports psychologists potentially, they have all of the information at their fingertips. So they're all educated, they all are, kind of kept up to date with research. But on the other side, they're all very competitive people. So there's almost like this drive, this internal drive to be the best and to be constantly available for athletes. So, and then on the flip side, a lot of sports psychologists who work with athletes also work in academic institutions. So there's different pressures coming from a different angle. Or from private practitioners, they want to consistently work with people because at the end of the day it generates their income. So I think what sports psychologists seem to do is take on a lot of stuff. They don't necessarily know how, or not that they don't know, but they don't necessarily give themselves the time to fully detach from their work And if you don't fully detach from your work, that's when you can become burnt out.
Right, and it would be a struggle to consult when you're feeling burnt out, and I would imagine the environment such as the Olympics, it'd be hard pressed to say, no, I need a moment to myself. So it's just a hard environment.
Exactly. So we touched on it before. It's like there's that expectation that you're going to be consistently on point, or you're going to be consistently available for all these athletes, managers, coaches, etc. The other thing being, depending on who you're working for, like which country, you may or may not have other people around you who are sports psychologists who you can actually go to for that social support, for the kind of either like an ear to listen to your problems, or a shoulder to not cry on, but like someone who you can vent to, or someone who you can literally go, look, I have an issue, or this athlete has approached me with this, with X, Y, and Z. What should I do? How do I approach this? So that can also lead to kind of forms of burnout. Whereas on the flip side, if you have a strong social support network around you, it can help you not become burnt out. It can help you detach from work. It can help you solve the problems that are presented to you, both personally and externally.
It's interesting that I think in sports psychology there's this idea, there's this competitiveness between sports psychologists, this almost like competitiveness over work, as if there isn't enough work to go around, when in reality there probably is. And I think that we need to make the kind of the social support between psychologists, between sports psychologists in particular, a little bit stronger and a little bit easier, like for everyone to pull together in the one direction rather than have everyone pulling in different directions. Off the back of the research and off the back of this paper that's just about to be published, what advice would you have to, we'll say, young, budding sports psychologists who are just starting down the road of becoming a sports psychology practitioner, or even to established sports psychology practitioners?
I think you kind of touched on it there, and one of the main things that I would say is build a strong support network around you. The evidence points to the fact that the best type of social support that you can get as a sports psychologist is actually work-related social support. So other people who understand exactly what you're going through, other psychologists who you can turn to for advice, and that you can reciprocate that kind of supportive nature with. So build a strong support network around you. Don't be competitive. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever way you want to look at it, the majority of sports psychologists will come from a sporting background, or will have a very strong interest in sport, otherwise we wouldn't be here. And with sport comes competitiveness. So it's trying to take it less from an individualized profession into more of like a team profession, if that makes sense. So think of it as like you're on a team. If your teammate is there, use them to your advantage. Use them to use each other for each other's advantage. Don't try and do it on your own, because you're just going to get burnt out. You're going to become just unable to maintain the level of work that you want to produce. Also, one of the things that is kind of very hard, especially for someone coming into the profession, is you do actually have to learn how to say no, and you have to learn not to take on everything that is offered to you. And that would be kind of a side benefit of having a strong social support team around you, is that if you can't take something on, you will know instantly who a good person to refer to would be, and hopefully they would return the favor in other kind of times. If you're busy, you can pass something on to your buddy, and if your buddy's really busy, they might send something your way. So build either informal peer support, or go out there and make it as formalized as possible. That's kind of the main thing to take from it.
So as an American in a new country, generally interested in cultural competencies and cultural differences within sports psychology, did you find any cultural differences with the different countries of the sports psychologists?
Yeah, I guess I suppose the main difference is that in Australia, when you're becoming a sports psychologist, you have to go through peer evaluation. So you're going to have a network of peers kind of set up already, compared to other countries, especially in Ireland, where sports psychology is such a kind of, it's so much still in its infancy that we don't have that kind of mandatory peer evaluation, peer support set up. So there are differences in that sense. In the States, there are a lot more sports psychologists, so a lot of the graduate programs are more well established than they are over here. So again, more people seem to know other people doing the same thing. From an Irish perspective, it's something that's growing. It's something that, definitely jump on that bandwagon right now, or create your own bandwagon and gather people around to be your buddy. That's the main thing.
That's cool. Well, we're all buddies here.
Yay.
And I think that'll close in on the third episode. I think we touched on some good points. Owen, do you have any closing words?
I've read the paper, and it's definitely worth reading. It's going to be open access, so anybody can read it once it's published. And when it is published, we'll link it on the website and on the Twitter and on the Facebook and all that. It's definitely worth a read. It's some great work from a great researcher in Hannah.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, and rate, and subscribe.
Right. So we'll do the social media stuff. So please like our Facebook page, and if anything, most importantly, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, because if we get 100 subscribers, then we could be youtube.com/sportspsychsesh. Until then, we're just a series of random letters and numbers. But facebook.com/sportspsychsesh, Twitter @sportspsychsesh, sportspsychsesh.blogspot.ie. Anything else we're missing? So stay tuned to our Facebook and Twitter for all the relevant things, and please like, share, comment, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, because that'll really help us grow. So thank you all. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.